This is more fun than having going on a roller coaster. Tell me when you're ready.
I'm ready. You're on.
Countdown.
No, you're on.
We're good?
Ain't no countdown.
We're already good. All right, we're on. I want to share with you, we finally found it, and we do have license to show it. So, welcome to all of you. Daniel, chapter 4 through chapter 6. But we're going to begin with one of my favorite groups of people, or, no, I guess they're not people, vegetables. Give it a whirl.
Oh, but very bad news for the wise men. You see, each one of them wanted to be second in command. Now that Daniel got the job, the wise men would have to do whatever he said. This made the wise men very unhappy, and they immediately started thinking of ways to get rid of Daniel.
And me. Oh no, what we gonna do? We gotta get him out of here.
We could throw him
The king likes
in
Daniel
the
more than me.
dungeon.
Oh
We
no, what
could
we gonna
let
do?
him
We gotta
rot
get him out of
in
here.
jail. We
Oh no,
could
what we
drag
gonna do?
him
The
to
king likes
the
Daniel more than me.
ocean.
Oh
Have
no,
him
what we gonna do?
eaten
We gotta
by
get him
a
out of here.
whale.
Oh, we could throw him in the tigers, let him float a while, then we'll all sit back and watch him meet a hungry crocodile. We could put him on a camel's back and send him off to with a cowboy hat without a brim, a boot without a spur. Oh, we could give him jelly donuts, take them all away, or we could fill his ears with cheese balls and his nostrils with sorbet. We could use him as a footstool or a table to play Scrabble on, then tie him up and beat him up and throw him out of Babylon.
Or
Yeah? Oh. Sneaky. And it just might
work.
We could use him as a footstool or a table to play Scrabble on, then tie him up and beat him up and throw him out of Babylon.
One of the things that I find very difficult for us to capture in our mind is that why was Babylon so blessed when the people of the Jews were there? Because there's a reason for that. When we think of Babylon, many of us think of Babylon in a bad way. And I'm not sure that we understand the concept of why it is good and why it was bad. When we think of Babylon, how many think of things that are really bad, really ugly, right? We think of that, right? Because everything that was associated with Babylon was pretty dire, pretty ugly, pretty idolatrous in a lot of different ways. Daniel was taken from Judea at the time when Nebuchadnezzar's army came and overcame the entire country. And they came and they took all of these folks, and we have to remember that Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, all of them were royalty. And they were brought into Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, and they were set aside, and they were trained to do what his magicians did, the Chaldeans. The Chaldeans were known for their magic. They were known for their black arts. They were known for all of the things that we consider negative towards Christianity, but they did it well. In fact, I'm doing some research right now that I really want to take a deep dive into, is that the Chaldeans knew how to interpret dreams, and they did it very, very well. So one of the things that we find when we read Daniel, especially in regards to dreams. But what I thought was interesting is I did some research. I found some scriptures that if you want to write these down and go back and look at them, it's very fascinating on the fact that Babylon was blessed by God. And the only reason why it was blessed by God is because God's people were taken from under a king that was pretty wicked and put into Babylon for safe protection to multiply. And multiply they did. They went in about 70,000, and when they left, there were close to 1 million of them. Similar to what happened when they went into Egypt. Now, why is that important? It's because God had a plan for the Jews. He had a plan for Daniel's kin to do something about taking back the land in which they were taken from. Now, here's a couple of scriptures that you might want to just kind of look at. Now, you got to remember that the people who built the Tower of Babel, which, by the way, the Tower of Babel was within the walls of Babylon. It was right there. In fact, there's a picture. I don't think that we have it, but it's in one of my handbooks that shows in 1899, I think is when it started, and maybe it was 1900, somewhere in that neighborhood, when they started to actually excavate the actual ruins of Babylon. The Tower of Babel was still partially there. It's fascinating. And to me, when we think about this, we think, oh, there's no proof of this. It was actually there. Throw up whatever you have of the Babylon pictures. This was the monument that Nebuchadnezzar built. This monument is phenomenal. It had a moat all the way around. The walls were nearly 70 feet thick. They were 75 feet tall. They went into the ground 35 feet, so that people could not, if they came to try to overthrow their kingdom, they considered that this fortress was almost impregnable. In other words, no one could get in there. And the water was shipped. Take it to the next one, which maybe some of you didn't get a chance to see it, but get to look at it, of the hanging gardens. This is an artist's conception of what's talked about in Scripture. And those plateaus where you see all of the green there are 120 yards square. In other words, a football field and plus 30 yards square. On them, to go to these hanging gardens, they called them, you actually could go in there and it was like a forest on top of this plateau. The arches that you see where the water's coming out and all that, they had B&Bs there. In other words, there were apartments there where people could come that were part of the kingdom's hierarchy, could come and stay and leisurely be there. These waters were pumped 300 feet into the air by hydraulic pumps, believe it or not, and watered these gardens in the middle of the desert when it's 120, 130 degrees. This is one of the 7 wonders of the world. To this day, no one has built a city, even Dubai and a couple of other places in Saudi Arabia have tried to build something that is similar to this in size, scope, and beauty. If you don't know it, if you ever want to do a little deep dive, go to Google and then go to Dubai. They have a underground ski resort in Dubai where you can ski 365, 24/7. Oh yeah. They have an underwater aquarium that is crazy. This beats it, if you can believe it. This beats it. And it's just so magnificent, you can't even imagine the wonder. And Nebuchadnezzar was pretty proud of it. We're going to talk about him today. And because of his pride, he got kind of booted in the pants for 7 years. Just saying. So saying all of that to say this is that this is what he lived in. This is where Daniel was taken and what Daniel had control over, believe it or not. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and several other provinces covered this area. Now, why is this important? Because God made sure that these people were protected. I think it's Jehoiakim is the king in Judah that was wicked and didn't have his act together and really threatened the Jewish community in a way that was unprecedented. God knew that, caused Nebuchadnezzar to come and take over and take these people into his kingdom, and for the next 70 years of his reign will protect them and let them multiply. And how do we know that? Here's some places that you can go and you can take a look at. In Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 through 9, that's the Babylon. That's the Babylon that we knew before language came. In Revelations 14, 7 and 8, it says, "Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea, and the springs of water." Another angel, the second, followed, saying, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the great, she who had made the nations drink the wine of passion of her sexual immorality." So there's a reason why people think that Babylon is negative. But the idea of Babylon, negative theme, can be traced from the voice of the psalmist in Psalms 137, 1 and 8 and 9. "By the waters of Babylon they sat down and wept, where we remembered Zion. O daughter of Babylon, doomed to be destroyed. Blessed shall be who repays you with what you have done to us. Blessed be he who takes all your little ones and dashes them against a rock." In Babylon, Jeremiah 29, 1 through 7 shows that a negative perspective on Babylon, while not wrong, is incomplete. In other words, there's a reason why Babylon prospered these years. The prophetic message against Babylon in Jeremiah 51 has, according to this author's opinion, had many biblical theologians to miss the uniqueness of God's plan for Babylon during the 70-year period of Daniel's exile. In other words, Daniel was in control of everything. It's fascinating to me. A man who came as a slave controls most of Babylon for the years that he was there. Now, the message against Babylon doesn't tell the whole story, but rather in Jeremiah 29, 1 and 5 through 7 tells us, "These are the words of the letter that Jeremiah the prophet sent from Jerusalem to the surviving elders of the exiles and to the priests and the prophets of all the people whom Nebuchadnezzar had taken away into exile in Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses." Look what he says to them. "Build houses, live in them, plant gardens, and eat the produce. Take wives and have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons. Give your daughters in marriage, and that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there, and do not decrease, but seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for it is welfare you will find your welfare." And it goes on to talk about it again in Psalms 137. The psalm mentions Babylon, but the Daniel, he said in Psalms 87:4, into play. He says, "Among those who you know me, mention Rahab and Babylon. Behold, Philistine and Tyre and Cush. This one was born there," they say. And then it goes on in Jeremiah chapter 24, talks about a story about bad figs and good figs. In Jeremiah 24, 5 and 6, he says, "Like good figs, so I will regard as good the exiles from Judah, whom I have sent away in this place to the land of the Chaldeans. I will set my eyes on them for good, and I will bring them back to this land." Talking about what happened when Cyrus showed up, and he cut all of the Jews loose to go back to Jerusalem to build the temple with funding from him. And this is a guy that was definitely an idolater. Then Jeremiah 24, 8 and 9 says this, "But this I say to the Lord, like bad figs that are so bad they cannot be eaten, so I will treat Zedekiah, the king of Judah, his officials, and the remnant of Jerusalem who remain in this land, and those who dwell in the land of Egypt. I will make them a horror to the kingdoms of the earth and a reproach. By word, a taunt, a curse to the places I shall drive them." And he goes on to talk about that in several other places. If you have a King James or a Thompson chain reference, you can follow this all the way back through the Old Testament. So I'm saying that we need to change our attitude, if you will, about what Babylon means, or what it has given us this this thought process where we find ourselves thinking that it's all bad. No, it was very good for the Jews, incredibly good, because it preserved a nationality, a nation. And when they were cut loose, as we'll find here in a moment, that they survived and did very, very, very well. And as much as I was talking about as the story with the leeks and onions, talking about what are we going to do with Daniel, the story is incredibly true. These Chaldeans, when Daniel was set over them as their overseer, they didn't like it. In fact, they hated it. They figured out any way they could to get rid of this dude. And we're going to see a couple of more attempts. And then we're going to see something very interesting. And I did a little more research to see whether or not this has ever happened before. When Nebuchadnezzar becomes a ox, for lack of a better term, and he eats the grass on those plateaus that you saw, he goes for 7 years and he congregates with his own cattle. Think about that for a minute. He went crazier than a bedbug. I mean, just nuttier than a fruitcake. And he did that. And then all of a sudden, something happens. And what happens is he recognizes the God of the universe. And he recognizes him, and he makes a point of giving glory to him. Because at the beginning of his time, he gets slapped with pride, which kills every one of us. In one way or another, pride will do you in. It will not end well for you. And Nebuchadnezzar found that out. So let's take a look at chapter 4, and let's read through chapter 4, and then I'll give some commentary on that. Fascinating story. King Nebuchadnezzar and all the peoples and nations and languages that dwell on all the earth. Look what he says. Peace be multiplied to you, that it seemed good to me to show the signs and wonders that the Most High God has done for me. How great are his signs, how mighty is his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion endures from generation to generation. This is the same guy. Look what happens in verse 4. This is his second dream. And Nebuchadnezzar was at ease in my house, prospering in his palace. I saw a dream that made me afraid, and I lay in bed, and the fantasies and visions of my head alarmed me. So I made a decree that all the wise men in Babylon should be brought before me, that they might make known to me the interpretation of the dream. Then the magicians, enchanters, the Chaldeans, the astrologers came in, and I told them the dream, and they could not make known to me what its interpretation. At last Daniel came in before me, who was named Belshazzar, but after the name of my God, and in whom the spirit of the holy gods. And I told him the dream, saying, O Belshazzar, chief of the magicians, because I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in you, and there's no mystery too difficult for you, tell me the vision of my dream that I saw in their interpretation. And the visions of my head as I lay in bed were these. I saw, and behold, a tree in the midst of the earth. Its height was great. The tree grew and became strong, and its top reached to the heavens and visible to the end of the whole earth. Its leaves were beautiful, and its fruit were abundant, and in it were food for all. The beasts of the fields found shade under it, and the birds of the heaven lived in its branches, and all the flesh was fed from it. I saw the vision in my head as I lay in bed, and behold, a watcher. Now, this is one of the times that you will find the name watcher. These are one of the holy ones. These are one of the ones of God's Most High God. These were part of his council. These are the watchers that God, the Most High God, sent into the earth to keep watch over the earth and report to him. This is one of them. A holy one came down from heaven. He proclaimed aloud and said thus, chop down the tree and lop off its branches and strip it of its leaves and scatter its fruit, lest the beast flee from under it and the birds from its branches. But leave the stump and its root in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze amid the tender grass of the field. Let him be wet with dew of heaven. Let his portion be with the beasts of the grass of the field. Let his mind be changed from a man's, listen to this, and let a beast's mind be given to him, and let 7 periods times pass over him. The sentence is by the decree of the watchers, plural. So there is more than one. Think about this for a minute. And the decision by the word of the holy ones, the end that the living may know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will and sets it over the lowliest of men. The dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, saw, and you, Belshazzar, tell me the interpretation, because all of the wise men of my kingdom are not able to make known to me the interpretation. But you are able, for the spirit of the holy gods is in you. And so Daniel interprets a dream. Then Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar, was dismayed for a while, and his thoughts alarmed him, as the king answered and said, Belshazzar, let not the dream or the interpretation alarm you. Belshazzar answered and said, My Lord, this is Daniel speaking, my Lord, may the dream be for those who hate you, and its interpretation for your enemies. This could put him in the lion's den. This could off with your head, buddy. And he said, the tree you saw, which grew and became strong, so that the top reached to heaven, it was visible to the ends of the whole earth, whose leaves were beautiful and its fruit abundant, and which the food for all, under which beasts of the field found shade, and those branches the birds of the heavens lived. It is you, O king. You have grown and become strong. Your greatness has grown and reaches the heavens, and your dominion to the ends of the earth. And because the king saw the watcher, the Holy One, coming down from heaven and saying, chop down the tree and destroy it, but leave the stump and its roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze in the tender grass of the field, but let him wet with dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts of the field, till 7 periods of time pass over him. This is a prophetic utterance also that is talking about years, seasons of times, or periods. O king, it is a decree of the Most High which have come upon my lord the king, that you shall be driven from among men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. You shall be made, hell, I don't know about you, but I'm not liking this one. You shall be made to eat grass like an ox, and you shall be wet in the dew of heaven, and 7 periods of time shall pass over you, till you know that the Most High rules the kingdoms of men and gives to you whom he will. And it is as he's commanded to leave the stump and the roots of the tree, your kingdom shall be confirmed for you for that time that you know that heaven rules. Therefore, king, let my counsel be acceptable of you. Break off your sins by practicing righteousness, and your iniquities by showing mercy to the oppressed, and there may be perhaps a lengthening of your prosperity. Now, I don't know about you, but I think I'm starting to freak out. If I'm Daniel, I want out of there. But he won't let him leave. Watch what he says. And this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of 12 months, he was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon. And the king answered him and said, is it not, look what he said, he's saying, pride. Is this not great Babylon, which I have built with my mighty power and my royal residence from the glory of my majesty? While the words were still in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom has departed you. You shall be driven from among men. Your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and you shall be made to eat the grass like an ox. For 7 periods of time passes over you until you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will. Wow. And immediately the word was fulfilled against Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven from among men. He ate grass like an ox. His body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hair grew as long as an eagle's feathers, and his nails were like a bird's claws. I don't think that there's anything Steven Spielberg can write this any better. And at the end of days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and reason returned to me. This is after 7 years. Now, what's interesting about this, I want just to add, Josephus, in his writings, a guy who is not a believer by any stretch of the imagination, strictly a historian, says that this is recorded in the Chaldean, Mesopotamian, and in the record that he said this actually happened. Think about it. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, and he does according to his will in the most heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand or say to him, what have you done? At the same time, my reason returned to me, for the glory of my kingdom, majesty and splendor returned to me. My counselors and lords sought me and established in my kingdom, and still more greatness was added to me. And now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor. Look what he says, the King of heaven. And for all of his works are right in his ways, and those who walk in pride, he is able to humble. Wow. So we go from one crisis to the next. Immediately in chapter 5, King Belshazzar made a great feast for thousands. Now, why did we just see something change? What did you just notice? Nebuchadnezzar's gone. He's out of the picture. We have a new king, Belshazzar. Interestingly enough, very close to the same name of Daniel, but he's not the king. Different king. A great feast for thousands of his lords, and drank wine in front of thousands. Belshazzar, when he tasted the wine, commanded that the vessels of gold and silver that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem. Boy, this was not a good plan. Not a good plan. That the king and his lords and his wives and his concubines might drink from them. God's not going to be happy about this. Just saying. When they brought the golden vessels that had been taken out of the temple to the house of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his lords and his wives and the concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. And then something very strange happens. Immediately the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace, opposite the lampstand, and the king saw a hand as it wrote. And the king's color changed. No kidding. And his thoughts alarmed him. His limbs gave way, and his knees knocked together. I don't know about you, but I think that's pretty much explaining what I would be doing. Okay? The king called loudly to bring the enchanters, the Chaldeans, the astrologers. How'd that work for Nebuchadnezzar? Not too well. The king declared that the wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and shows me its interpretation, shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then all the king's wise men came in, and they could not read the writing or make known to the king the interpretation. Then King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed. His color changed again. His lords were perplexed. The queen, because of the words the king and the lords had come into the banqueting hall, the queen declared, O king, live forever. Let not your thoughts alarm you or your color change. It must have been pretty obvious. Color change. There's a man in your kingdom in whom the spirit of the holy gods, in the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, and his father of the gods were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father, the king, made him chief of the magicians and enchanters, Chaldeans and astrologers, because of an excellent spirit, knowledge and understanding to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve problems. They were found in Daniel, whom the king named Belshazzar. Now, let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation. Wow. Dun, dun, dun. Doors open. Here he comes. Then Daniel was brought before the king. The king answered, said to Daniel, you are that Daniel, the one of the exiles of Judah, whom the king, my father, brought from Judah? I've heard that you can, and the spirit of the gods is in you, that the light and understanding and excellent wisdom is found in you. Now the wise men and the enchanters have been brought, but they before me to read this writing and make known its interpretation, but they could not show me the interpretation of this matter. But I have heard that you have given interpretations, solve problems. Now, if you can read this writing and make known to me the interpretation, you should be clothed with purple. Okay, he's trying to bribe him. This has never happened well with any other prophet, remember? So there's some problem. They're just saying. Chain of gold around your neck and be the third ruler in the kingdom. And Daniel answered and said before the king, let your gifts be for yourself, and give your rewards to another. Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation. O king, the most high God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father kingship and greatness and glory and majesty. And because of his greatness that he gave him, all his people, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would, he killed, and whom he would, he kept alive, and whom he would, he raised up, and whom he would be humbled. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened, so that he dealt proudly, he was brought down from his kingly throne, and his glory was taken from him. And it was driven from him among the children of mankind, and his mind was made like that of a beast, and his dwelling was with wild donkeys. And he fed grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, until he knew that the Most High God rules the kingdom of mankind, and sets over it whom he will. And you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all this, but you have lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven. And the vessels of this house that have been brought before you, and your lords and your wives and your concubines have drank wine from, that they praise the gods of silver, gold, bronze, and wood and stone, which not see or hear or know, but the God in whom the hand is your breath, and whose all your ways you have not honored. Then from this presence his hand was sent, and a writing was inscribed, and in this writing was inscribed, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. And the interpretation of the matter, Mene, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed, and the balances have been wanted. Peres, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and to the Persians. I have some information, some history that will blow your mind. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and Daniel was clothed with purple, like now, and a chain of gold around his neck, and a proclamation was made about him, the third ruler of the kingdom. But that very night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed. And Darius the Mede received the kingdom about 62 years old. Verse 6, chapter 6. I want to give you some indication. I think it's very interesting that there was a way to defeat Babylon. No one had an army big enough to do it, but there was one, a Persian. We are going to see that happen here in just a moment. A Persian. What they did is that they diverted the Euphrates River, literally diverted it, so that the riverbed went dry, and they walked right into the city, and they took it over while they were partying. Yeah. Think about it. Okay, here we go. Yeah. It's crazy what happened. She said, what'd you ask? The moat went dry. Totally. Their protection was gone. The moat was 120 yards wide. They had to have a ferry boat to go from one end to the other. That's how they got into the city. It went dry, and they walked in on dry ground. Believe it or not. It's a fascinating story. If you can think that area right there, they just walked right in. Their army came in, and they plundered the place.
The bigger thing was, how did they divert it? That's a whole river.
I have no idea, but I just know one thing. They were smarter than the guy that was there. Yeah, they were smarter. And I'll give you some timeline in regards to that. I just think it's fascinating. To me, that's just fascinating. Chapter 6 deals with Daniel and the lion's den. Now, this is funny because this guy that's here, Darius, this guy cracks me up. He absolutely gives me a giggle when I think about this guy, to be so self-centered, so prideful that he thinks that he's cool, and he's either the general or anyway, I'll explain to that. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be throughout the whole kingdom. Over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps, governors, should be given account so that the king might suffer no loss. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps because of his excellent spirit was in him. Well, duh. And the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. The high officials and satraps sought to find a ground for complaint. That was those guys you saw wandering around that looked like onions and leeks. That's them. Okay, now. And they've only complained against Daniel with regard to the kingdom. They could find no ground for complaint or any fault because he was faithful and no error. He was faithful to every king that was there, especially to Nebuchadnezzar. Those guys were tight. I mean, it's hard to believe, but they were just really tight. These men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." Then these high officials and satraps, governors, came to agreement that the king said to him, "O King Darius, live forever." What do you do when you want to get something? You appeal to someone's pride, right? You puff them up. You blow them up. Just remember, when you blow something up, someone can pop you. Just saying. Look what he said. And so he goes through all of this, establishing an ordinance and enforcing an injunction. Whoever makes a petition to any god or man for 30 days, except to you, O king, will be cast into the den of lions. Yeah, bummer. Big bummer. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so it cannot be changed. According to the law of the Medes, this is really hard to understand, but the Medes were actually, to the Babylonians, they were an enemy, and they've taken over. And the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Persians is important because these guys were pretty nasty people. Therefore, King Darius signed the document and the injunction. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went into his house where he had windows, of course, in his upper chamber towards Jerusalem. And he got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as he always has done. These men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and plea before his God. And they came near and said before the king concerning the injunction, "O king, oh, by the way." Remember, they were saying, we've got to figure out a way to get rid of him. Okay. "Did you sign an injunction that anyone who petitions any other god or man within 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions?" And the king answered and said, "That thing stands fast. According to the law and the Medes and the Persians, we cannot be revoked." Then he answered and said before the king, "Daniel, who is the one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, and the injunction you have signed makes his petition 3 times a day." The king heard these words and was much distressed and set his mind to deliver Daniel. But look at what he says. "And he labored till the sun went down to rescue him. And then these men came by agreement to the king and said, O king, that is the law of the Medes and the Persians. No injunction or ordinance that the king has established can be changed." This is kind of like an executive order. Okay. Then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought down and cast into the den of lions. Now, I want you to remember what the den of lions looked like. It wasn't 2 lions. It was a pride. In other words, there was probably a good 10 to 12. What did they do to them? They starved them until it was time to serve somebody up. Now, look what the king says to Daniel. "May your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you." And a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and the signet of his lords. Do you think the king, do you think this guy slept at all? I don't think so. Might be concerning Daniel, because he knows what happened to the other kings when they did stuff that wasn't cool. I'm following them. The king went to his palace, spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought into him, and sleep fled from him. Then at the break of day, the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. I love what he says. And he came near to the den where Daniel was. He cried out in a tone of anguish, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" I love it. I love this part. And Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God has sent his angel to shut the lion's mouth, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him. And as also before you, O king, I have done no harm." And the king was exceedingly glad, and he commanded that Daniel be taken out of the den. So Daniel was taken up from the den, and no kind of harm was found on him, because he had trusted his God. And the king commanded, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast into the den of lions. And they, their children, and their wives. And before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all of their bones into pieces. Then King Darius wrote to all the peoples and nations and languages that dwelt on the earth, peace be multiplied to you, and I make a decree. In other words, I changed my mind. That in my royal dominion people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. I don't know about you. For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel prospered again during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Now, let's take a look at this. Let's break this down. You're going to have some questions, I'm sure, but I want to share this with you. I think it's really kind of interesting. During this time, this other dream that Nebuchadnezzar had given, this chapter 4, we're going to go back over that, the king's madness. Perhaps sensing this dream was against him, he didn't know what to do. And Daniel straight away calls it out. And he says, this is what's going on. I had to look seriously to see if this has ever happened to anyone in real time. And I found out that there is a malady out there where people actually take on the attitudes and the attributes of animals. It is a sickness. It is a real deal. I could not believe that. I thought, oh, this only happens back in 563 BC, right? No, this actually happens to people now. That people come under, if anything else, I would just call it a curse. And I thought it was very fascinating that when they were recording this and they were talking about, historians were talking about it, that they had seen this before. And I thought, so this is a real thing. So when he was smitten with this mental disease, which fancied himself as a beast and tried to act like one, modern psychiatrists would probably say the king showed characteristics of a depressive illness and delusional behavior. Duh. 7 times refers to seasons. Historians tell us that Babylonian summer and winter were the only seasons they counted. So there were 7 cycles or 7 years. The 3rd time Nebuchadnezzar bowed before God and proclaimed his power for all the world. In chapter 5, this is kind of interesting because Nebuchadnezzar had been dead for 23 years, and the current king, Belshazzar, is planning a feast. Strictly speaking, Nabonidus, 556 to 539 BC, was the last king of Babylon, and he retired to Arabia early in his reign, leaving his son, Belshazzar, acting as the king in Babylon. Daniel had been in Babylon for literally 70 years. Came at 16, he's about 86 at this point in time. Very old man. The date is now 539 BC. This great feast in the palace was going full swing, and this mysterious hand comes and starts to write on the wall, which changed the color of the guy's face. Just saying. Probably his blood pressure went up, I'm sure. But anyway, Daniel's is summoned to interpret, but he goes directly to the words number, weigh, and divide. The king's days were indeed numbered, because this is what happened. Let me tell you what happened at this point in time. Okay. That very night, Cyrus the Persian took the impregnable city of Babylon. The ancient historians tell us that they diverted the course of the river Euphrates and entered along the dry riverbed while the Babylonians were at feasting with their gods. As conqueror, listen carefully now, as conqueror, Darius reigned in Babylon for probably about 2 years, 538 to 536, when Cyrus returned to reign as king of Babylon. Now, what's important about Cyrus is that Cyrus cuts the Jews loose. Something tells him he has a visitation. They don't say a watcher, but they say he has a visitation, and he makes a declaration, get these guys out of here. I don't want them here anymore. I don't want to be around them anymore. Too many weird things happen when they're here. I want them gone. And the ancient historians say, that, as Josephus has said, that Darius would have been the father-in-law of Cyrus, one of his generals who led the army that conquered Babylon to begin with. Now, chapter 6 will begin a very interesting time pattern. And we are looking at Daniel and his high officers of the Babylonian Empire. During the 70 years, he's about 90 or so, yet Darius, the conqueror of Babylon, immediately placed Daniel in charge of the Babylonian government, and nobody liked it. You know, he had a track record. He'd been through 3 kings. He never, ever messed up. He was always doing the right thing, and they said that he had an excellent spirit. Probably because Daniel had just foretold the victory of the Medes in chapter 5, verse 28. Fascinating. He just gave them, this is what's going to happen. You're going to win. The Medes were going to win. And his life of Daniel had been unswerving faith, showed himself to be a true man of God. But his enemies hated him, and they wanted him out of there. And they could only attack him through his religion. Are you not seeing that today? Come on. Daniel could have stopped praying for a month, or he could have just prayed in secret. But not Daniel. What did he do? God and everybody. But he was no more ready to compromise now than he was as a boy. That just shows us some faith and some courage. And I think, that's what we're talking about. So his enemies had him. They had him. But the thing that's interesting about that, when the enemy plans something against you, God plans a better return. I don't know how it works. I can't figure that out. But the miracles of this book blow my mind. Blow my mind. Because what's going on through Nebuchadnezzar to Darius to Cyrus, all of these things that are happening seem to be one of the most amazing stories that I can imagine. Next week, we're going to begin the prophetic side, chapter 7, and we're going to work through chapter 12. We're going to take 4 weeks to nail this down. Now, why am I want 4 weeks? Because I want. Well, I know it's not Jesus, so I'm not going to answer it. What I want to share with you is this, and I think is important for you to get, and I think it's really an amazing problem. Many people think that Daniel's prophetic side is hard to understand. It is not. There is a determination that everybody uses within those five chapters or so, that it actually talks about and gives you the keys to the book of Revelation. The keys that you use, if you use them correctly, will give you a timeline of what actually is going to be taking place in the future and in the present. I believe, personally, that we are currently in the end of days. A lot of people could shake. When I first got saved, everybody told me, Jesus is coming next year, And I remember a book, 88 Reasons Why Jesus is Coming Back in 1988. Never happened. That book went for $16.95 on the book. Am I right? It went for $16.95, and on January 1st, 1989, it was 25 cents. I guess I can imagine why. There are several other books that have come through that guys have predicted. You will never predict this. This is what's key. But the sign of the times is such now that I think that we need to understand what is being said in Revelations and in Daniel to understand what we should expect. Much of what we understand today is based on, I'll call it what it is, a lie. Because the prophecy theology and the faith group that's out there that's trying to share with us all of this stuff have nothing to base it on. However, if you go back and you look at this with the age of the timeline of real-time things, for instance, Cyrus, I will show you that when Cyrus cuts the people in Babylon loose to go back to Jerusalem, I will show you that it's exactly 70 years from the time that the prophecy was given in Jeremiah. It's fascinating. It's exactly 70 years. Not 71, not 69 and a half, 70 years. They actually get cut loose to go back to build the temple. What God told them to do. And he had protected them in Babylon all of this time to grow to a huge number of people to be able to do exactly that. They needed that many to be able to do what they needed to do. So with all of that being done, God is always sovereign in how he deals with stuff. And he always follows through and does it exactly as he said. The thing is that men seem to think they're smarter than God. And I got news for you. Daniel is the only prophet that was never called a prophet. Think about it. And only one time in Matthew, Jesus refers to Daniel as the seer, as something different than what others have all the way through the Old Testament. Now, I got 9 minutes left. So, any questions? Anything making you, and we don't care where we go. I mean, I'd like to talk about what we're talking about tonight, but my point being.